So a little about me. I'm a personal trainer, and I share a space in an office that also has an acupuncturist and a chiropractor. Usually they operate during the day, and I will go in around 7 to 8 p.m. at night to work out and do heavy lifting so their clients don't have to hear metal clinking or banging in another room. Every once in a while the door will unlock and a cleaning person will come in. As they do, the door will chime, they will clean, and then they'll leave. The family that cleans the building is Hispanic. It's usually a taller man who is very nice, and he will clean our office, and a woman who I assume is his wife will walk around with a trash bag and pick up in the other buildings in the area. Tonight was the usual routine. Go to the office, drop off some paperwork, and squeeze in an evening workout. As I'm putting away some stuff and printing off a few things, I hear the door unlock. It's an old door and it makes a very distinct clink sound when the key turns in it. It chimed and a man came walking in, asking me in Spanish if he could come in. Now I don't speak Spanish, and so he repeated in what he said in English. "Can I come inside?" Of course I think it's one of the members of the family to come clean, and I say yes. It isn't until 10 minutes later, after I go to throw away something, that I notice the trash is still there, and this man is just sitting in front of the door. I didn't want to be rude, but I didn't understand why on a Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. this guy was just sitting here in the office alone with me. I text the chiropractor and I tell her what's going on, to which she calls me immediately and says, "You need to leave. There is a button on the alarm to notify the police. Do you want me to come over?" I tell her yes, and I grab my stuff. I then approach the man, telling him, "I'm leaving for the night and turning on the alarm, so you need to leave." He looked at me and shook his head and said a very firm no. I freeze up, thankful that I still have someone on the phone. I ask, "Why are you here?" He mumbles something along the lines of, "I'm on probation." I tell him that this office isn't for probation, and in my mind I am thinking, why would someone be reporting to an officer at 8:30 p.m. on a Sunday? This office is holistic. We have Buddhas and incense around. It says Oriental medicine on the door. He stood up and blocked the door. He started asking what the office really was, and I told him it was for an acupuncturist and other specialities. As I type this, I wonder why he cared to know. It wasn't for probation. Why would he care so much to know what the office was? I wonder if I'd made a mistake in telling him. He then pulled out his phone and began to scroll through it. He said he doesn't know the address and maybe I can help him, suggesting I walk over to peer at his phone. I tell him I can't help him and he needs to leave. He scrolls for 5 minutes on his phone, and at this point I'm hoping the chiro will get here soon. He holds up his phone at me and shows me a random list of 20 to 30 addresses. I tell him, "Maybe what you're looking for is across the street, but not here. You need to leave." He seems hesitant to leave, but finally turns around and walks out slowly. As soon as he gets outside, I lock the door. I guess it didn't matter because this man somehow had a key and got in, but I locked that door as soon as I could. It was only then that I noticed there was a van parked in front of my car outside. This man gets in the passenger side, so he isn't alone. I decide to wait until the car leaves before I get in my own car. The way they parked, it would only take them backing up 5 feet to box me into the space. The van is huge with suicide doors on the back, and it then proceeds to wait for 15 minutes before slowly pulling out. It stops in front of the office as if they were taking one last look at the building, and then they slowly pull away. I wait and notice that they have only pulled up 50 feet, just out of my sight. They are still there and I can barely see the headlights. It's like they are waiting for something. Thankfully, the chiropractor pulled up in her car in time and the van was gone. The whole experience was unreal. I can't seem to wrap my head around it. The fact that this man came in with a key and acted like he was there for probation doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. The fact he wanted to know what the office really was and how he blocked the door is also bizarre. A few weeks ago, when I was moving equipment into the space, I felt like I was being watched. I ended up burning some sage and thought maybe I was just paranoid about being in a new space at night, but now I'm wondering if there was something I was picking up on that I didn't know yet. I will keep this updated as things progress. Hopefully that man doesn't come back in, and hopefully we get a security camera installed and the locks changed. I am female, almost 38 years old, and would like to tell you about an experience that I had with my dog at the time. It happened about 11 years ago. It was an autumn night, and I decided to take a little walk around our housing estate with my dog, Sunny. Sunny is a big black Labrador mix, is really well behaved and very cuddly, but she hated other female dogs. She also has a strong protective instinct and always growls when she doesn't know or doesn't like someone or something. I was out walking, and there were no streetlights around the estate. The only lighting I could see was at the entrances to the houses. There was a small park with small playgrounds between the rows of houses, but, as already mentioned, everything was in complete darkness, and I couldn't see Sunny very well. I could only hear her when she was chasing a rabbit into the bushes. So obviously it goes without saying that she wasn't on the leash. I only need to put her on when there are other female dogs nearby. Sunny listens to my every word and always comes when I call her. So while I strolled comfortably through the dark settlement and froze my ass off, Sunny ran happily through the area and the bushes. I could always only guess where she was though, because like I said, I couldn't see her. At some point I noticed a small shadow that was whizzing around me, and when I looked closer I could see Sunny running in large circles around me. I thought she was chasing something, but the circles she drew grew smaller and smaller. She wasn't making any noise, so I carried on walking, thinking this was her having her crazy 5 minutes. At some point though, I didn't see her at all anymore, but I went on knowing she would follow me. Then suddenly I heard a sound. Footsteps. But they weren't my own. I was startled because they were so close behind me so suddenly. I turned around but couldn't see anything thanks to the darkness. At this point I was really nervous and called for Sunny because it could have been someone with a dog, but Sunny didn't come. I was panicked. Suddenly out of nowhere, there she stood right in front of me, and she began to growl as violently as she has ever done before. My blood froze because it could only mean something bad. Then she started walking straight ahead, growling, and at about 2 or 3 meters she stopped. At that moment I recognized a figure, completely in black. This person was standing very still in front of Sunny, not moving a muscle. Sunny started barking like there was no tomorrow, so the person slowly walked backwards towards the lit house entrances. Sunny was now baring her teeth in front of what looked like a young man, wearing a hooded sweater. He was probably just as scared as I was on seeing him, because as close as he had sneaked up on me, he couldn't have had any good intentions. Since it was too dark, however, he couldn't see that I had Sunny with me, and she must have surprised him at the right time. Sunny started to jump, and at that moment the guy let out a scream, and you could hear something falling from his hand onto the floor. He ran and my dog followed. After I had released myself from my shock stiffness, I called out to Sunny as loud as I could, and after a short time she was standing in front of me again, wagging her tail. I took her on the leash and then went to where the guy had dropped something, and there, on the floor, was a tree branch as thick as an arm. It certainly wasn't a stick he would throw for a dog to collect. He didn't have a dog. Once I was at home, it gradually dawned on me that Sunny wasn't having her crazy 5 minutes when she circled me, but it was the fact that she had long since noticed and kept an eye on this guy to protect me. On the one hand, that was creepy, but also a relief. But I was, and still am, so grateful for my great dog, Sunny. So, some background context. This was back in the 90s when our only option was a landline phone and a dial-up internet. I was around 8 or 9 years old when my mum started leaving me at home with my oldest brother while she went to work. My brother was much older, around 17 at the time, and as most teenage boys, his favourite thing to do was sleep really late during the day and stay up all night playing video games. I remember being bored playing with my Barbies in the living room of my house, with the blinds wide open to let some light in and save on electricity. I would sit there for hours and play. When Mum was gone, she always told us to answer the phone when it rang, in case she was calling to check on us and make sure we were okay. I remember one day specifically I answered the phone and just heard loud breathing on the other end. I kept saying hello, but no one would reply. So eventually I would hang up. This went on daily for about 2 months, and it was always in the morning time when my brother was still asleep. Being a naive 8-9-year-old girl, I didn't really think anything of it, and eventually the calls stopped. A few months go by and I'm sitting on my living room floor again when the phone rings. I hear the same breathing again and say, "Hello, who is this?" To my surprise, a man replies and says, "Hello, kitten, do you remember me?" I remember being surprised that he called me kitten, but replying that he had the wrong number. This is where it gets creepy. He then replies, "No, kitten, I have the right number. You're wearing a kitty shirt right now." I remember looking down and immediately panicking and hanging up the phone when I see the tabby kitten on my shirt. The phone then rings again and I refuse to answer it. I run to wake up my brother and he sleepily follows me to the living room. The phone rings again and he answers it, but this time no one is there. He then unplugs the phone and tells me that it is just my imagination and to leave him alone so he can sleep. Being scared, I decided to close the windows and sit on the couch until my mum got home that afternoon. That night I told my mum what had happened, but my brother told her I was making it up and that he didn't see or hear anything. I think my mum believed me, but she just told me to hang up the phone if it wasn't her and to never open the door to any strangers. I agreed and told her I wouldn't. That next day my mum was off work and she took me to the store with her. We were walking around when I noticed a man in a long trench coat. I thought the coat was weird but didn't really think anything of it. We then ran into one of my mum's friends, who has a daughter my age. My mum and her friend were chatting away, and me and the girl were standing a few feet from them, messing with some birthday cards. We went around to the other side of the cards to look, out of sight of our mums. Suddenly, the man with the trench coat was right by us, looking at cards too. He then picked up a card and turned to me and my friend and said hello. Being polite, we respond with a hello in return. He then started picking up cards saying he's getting his daughter something and asks what we like. My friend points to a random card and he smiles and says that it's nice. He then picks up another card and shows it to us. The card has kittens all over it and he looks directly at me and says, "I'm sure you like kittens, don't you?" I didn't really know how to respond and remember feeling extremely nervous. He smiled when he saw me getting nervous and says, "Kittens and Barbies." This kicked my fight or flight into action, even at the young age of 8 and 9. I nervously laughed and said we had to go back to our mums now. The man then reached out and grabbed my arm. My friend took off running around the corner to get my mum. The man tried to pull me to the front of the store, but I kicked him as hard as I could and flew out of his grip. He then got up and ran out the door, at just about the time that my mum makes it over to me. The police were called and a report was filed. To my knowledge, they never found the man, but my mum was extremely paranoid after hearing the link between the phone calls and the incident, and she found a new house in the city right over from us, not even a month later. Thankfully, that was the last time I heard from him. When I was in my early 20s and living in Chicago, I wasn't making much money, but I found this apartment that was too good to be true. It was on the top floor of a duplex with 6 rooms for $775 a month. The agent who showed me the apartment stressed to me that the landlords were very religious, but I didn't have a problem with that, even if it did sound a little ominous. The landlords were an elderly couple that lived downstairs. They seemed okay at first. When I saw them in the yard, they would smile at me. I took good care of the house, but when they saw I was having my boyfriend over, things started to get really weird. One day I was in my office writing when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it and it's the old lady from downstairs. Before I could say hello, she says, "Have you ever gotten an abortion?" I shut the door in her face. No thanks. This was a colossal mistake. The house was laid out kind of weird. There was a door at the bottom of a flight of stairs that I thought led to a communal laundry room, but after accidentally opening it once, I discovered it led directly into my landlord's living room. I unfortunately learned this the hard way. One time I was in my kitchen cooking. My boyfriend was at work and I was by myself when I heard what sounded like the click of a door. "Okay," I said out loud. "What the hell was that?" I didn't really make the connection. It could have been the door that led into their living room. I walked into the hallway and look around. I don't see anyone at the end of the hallway, so I poke my head into all of the rooms, but there's nobody there. Then I look down the staircase leading to their house, and the neighbor lady is standing there staring me down. I screamed and she flinched and stepped back into her apartment and swung the door shut. After that, every time I left the house, and I spent every possible moment out of the house after that incident, I would come back and something would have been moved. A window would be shut, or for instance this one time the shower was dripping and my towel was damp. I couldn't lock the door because it was technically a door to their house, so they were the only ones with the key. The knocking got so frequent, 3 or 4 times a day, that me and my boyfriend propped up an old mattress so we wouldn't have to hear it while we slept. The second to last straw was when I opened the door for work, and the stairs were gone. I physically could not leave my house because there were no stairs. They had been dismantled and were sitting on their porch. I called them repeatedly, but they didn't answer. Finally, their son came out of the house and explained that they were remodeling their porch. He told me I had to cut through their apartment downstairs. I descended the stairs and opened the door, and they were both sitting at their filthy kitchen table, staring at me. The phone was in its cradle, so they must have heard it ringing. They kept staring at me with this blank look on their faces. I crossed their kitchen and left out their back door. A few days later I came home from my job and noticed the bathroom floor was almost completely flooded, like somebody had left a faucet on or the shower. The old woman, seeing that I had come home, came upstairs and knocked, screaming at me that I had flooded the bathroom and that her son had to come and fix it. I was so run down at this point that I just told her it was okay. Her son came by a few hours later, and he is shit-faced. I open the door and tell him that I need an hour or so before he comes, and he picks up something and swings it at me. It was a massive wrench. I somehow duck out of the way and he stumbles over. I book it down the newly repaired stairs as quickly as possible and call the police. They come by and take down a complaint, but claim since there was no physical contact they can't do anything. I learn later that the old couple has a daughter on the force. In the middle of the night, me, my boyfriend, and several of his friends packed all our stuff into a Chevy Astro. We lived in hotels and the van for a month until we found another house. They never attempted to contact us again. A short background story. I'm a 24-year-old female and have been dating my boyfriend since I was 15. The first 6 years of our relationship have been kind of long distance. I used to go visit him on weekends, and it would take me around 2 hours by bus and train to reach the station where he would come pick me up. This story takes place when I was 18, so I was quite used to public transportation by then, and I was aware of the creeps and weirdos one would encounter when travelling. Nothing really creepy had ever happened to me, apart from the usual stares and unsolicited, "Hello, beautiful." One Saturday morning I got on the usual train for the last 15-20 minutes of my trip, after travelling for 1.5 hours by bus. I always tended to sit either close to other girls or to families with children. This one time the train carriage was quite empty, so I sat across from a young guy with flamingos on his t-shirt and a laptop. I don't really remember who the other people in our carriage were, but that seat just looked like the safest one. Shortly after the departure, another guy entered the carriage and sat down next to me. He looked 25 to 30 years old, and he was wearing some dirty old clothes and smelled like sweat and possibly booze. He said hi, and I said hi back. As I wrote before, I was quite used to weirdos talking to me on buses and trains, so I didn't immediately feel like I was in danger. In my experience, it was usually better to engage on a short and meaningless conversation than ignore them completely. He asked what my name was, so I made one up. Then he asked why I was travelling all alone, and I said my boyfriend was waiting for me at the following station. I hoped this would be enough to make him desist, but I was oh so wrong. He started telling me that he had just gotten a new phone, and he had lost all of his friends' numbers. He asked me to give him my number so he'd have someone to talk to at night. What the hell? I politely declined. At that point I was starting to feel very uncomfortable, but my stop was only 5 to 10 minutes away, and I still hoped and thought he was going to give up and leave. He insisted on me giving him my phone number and started getting closer to me. At this point I stopped answering his questions and looked in the opposite direction. This must have bothered him, because he suddenly put his dirty hand on my thigh to get my attention. I was terrified, but I managed to utter a shaky, "Don't touch me." I wish I had yelled it, but I didn't, and no one in the carriage noticed what was going on. Not even the flamingo guy who was literally in front of us. Or maybe he did notice and didn't care at first. The guy didn't take his hand off me, and I was petrified. I don't remember if he said something else at that point, because I was focused on his hand on my jeans. I gained some more courage and managed to tell him to leave me alone, in a slightly louder voice. I guess that some people started looking in our direction at that moment, because he suddenly got up and left. I started crying for the relief as soon as he exited the carriage. The flamingo guy asked if I was okay and if I needed him to call someone. I said I was fine. I tried to call my boyfriend, but he didn't answer because he was driving to come pick me up. I thought it was over. The train started slowing down, and I got up in order to get off. Little did I know, though, that the creepy guy was most probably keeping an eye on me from the window of the carriage door after he left. I got off the train and started to look around, hoping to see my boyfriend, who would sometimes wait for me on the platform. At that point I noticed that the guy had stepped off the train as well. As soon as we made eye contact, he started walking towards me. I felt my heart drop. I turned around and started walking quickly towards the stairs, hoping he would lose me in the crowd. As soon as I reached the underground corridor, I started running, and eventually got to the other side of the tunnel. Then I ran up the stairs and towards the restrooms. I don't know why I didn't run to the main hall instead. I was panicking, and I just went for the first place that came to my mind. I locked myself into one of the cubicles, made sure it was closed, and then got up onto the toilet so he wouldn't see my feet. I was wearing a pair of distinctive boots at the time. 20 to 30 seconds later, I heard someone come in and hastily try all the door handles. Of course it could have been anyone, but I'm convinced it was him. It just made no sense for anyone else to try to open all the doors like that. I remember feeling my heartbeat in my throat while I was waiting for him to leave. I remained still and silent for what felt like ages, until I heard him walk away. At that point I started crying again, and finally managed to call my boyfriend and tell him I was locked into one of the toilet stalls. When he got there, I came out of the stall and I was shaking uncontrollably, but he somehow managed to calm me down. When we got out to the restrooms, there was no sign of the guy, and I never saw him again. Looking back now, I know I should have reported him to the authorities, but I stupidly thought that they wouldn't believe me, or that they were going to shrug it off as not being a big deal. After all, nothing really bad happened on the train, and I had no proof that it was him trying to open the stall doors. This experience made me avoid trains for a while, but after some time I managed to overcome my fear. First, some backstory. I'm from Malaysia, and this story happened in one of the international airports there. I was coming from the east of Malaysia, and I was a student at one of the local universities in the peninsula. You can't travel to the peninsula of Malaysia by land because it's separated from East Malaysia by the South China Sea, so of course the fastest way to get to it is by flying, and for some reason I really like taking the last flight of the night to get to my destination. I usually travelled alone, and I mostly kept to myself as I am an introvert and don't really like talking to strangers. Before that night, I haven't really encountered any problems with weird people, as the airport tended to be busy, and I always stayed in an area filled with other people minding their own business. And during the flight, I would just read or listen to some music. I also tended to just ignore the person sitting next to me. One night, my flight was delayed. We were supposed to reach our destination close to midnight, but with the delay, we would be landing at 2 a.m. I remember being frustrated because I knew it would be hard to get an Uber that late at night. I sighed and then just decided that I would spend the night at the airport and grab an Uber the next morning to my university. No big deal, I thought. People do this all the time. So I relaxed into my seat. I forgot to mention earlier that during the flight, I was supposed to sit in the middle seat, but when everyone was seated, I noticed that the aisle seat was empty, so I moved there. This was when I noticed the guy sitting in the window seat was acting strangely. He kept looking at me and was trying to get my attention, but I ignored him with all my might because I was just tired and really didn't want to make conversation with anyone. I just closed my eyes and pretended to sleep. I remember it was really cold and was thinking about turning off the AC on the top of my seat, but I didn't want to move because then the guy would know I was awake and I'd be forced to engage in a conversation with him. It was a 2.5-hour flight after all, and I just want to be left alone. I suddenly then felt a whole lot colder than before, so I opened my eyes just a little to figure out what was going on. Then I saw the guy actually adjusting both the AC from the top of his seat and also the AC from the middle seat to face me. This really annoyed me, but I'm not someone who likes to confront people for anything, so I just sucked it up and closed my eyes, even though I was shivering. I just sort of hugged myself and continued to ignore this guy. I honestly don't know what the guy was thinking doing that to me. I thought he was done doing whatever he was doing and wouldn't bother me anymore after that. After all, I didn't respond to whatever the heck he was doing, even though I am now suffering in silence from the cold. Later on, when the air hostesses started to distribute the prepaid meals to the passengers, he noticed that I didn't have a meal when he got his, so he suddenly tapped my shoulder. I tensed up and looked at him in alarm. I really don't like being touched by people either, due to some childhood trauma. But this guy didn't seem to notice my reaction to him and just smiled at me. "Hey, I noticed that you don't have a meal. Aren't you hungry?" "You know what? You can have my meal," he said, and I was just looking at him before saying, "No, it's okay," and smiled uncomfortably. But he insisted, and even got me to lower my table, forcing me to accept it. Then he ordered another meal for himself and started telling me that he can't eat alone after seeing me. He said he felt sorry for me and that it was in his nature to help people. He then started to watch me eating his meal with a big grin on his face. He didn't even touch his until after I was done. Now, if the meal wasn't prepared by the airline and it wasn't still sealed, I would definitely think he'd put something in it. But then I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe he really was just trying to be helpful, even though I felt extremely uncomfortable and he was being a little forceful. He even moved to the middle seat to be closer to me. He then asked me what my name was and told me his name was Sam and that he works somewhere in the peninsula. I just nodded, and then he asked me where I was from and why I was going to the peninsula. I gave him a short but honest answer, just to be polite. I told him I was a student at one of the local universities there. He then asked me how I was going to get to my university at this hour. I stupidly said, "Oh, I'm just going to spend the night at the airport. I'm used to it." "What? No, that's too dangerous for a girl as pretty as you," he said, before continuing. "You know what? My brother has a place not far from the airport. Why don't you stay with me?" "Oh, don't worry, my sister-in-law is there. You wouldn't be alone." "Don't worry, I'm a good person," he said, still with that big grin on his face. I immediately became afraid and quickly said no while shaking my head. "There will be a lot of people at the airport. I'm used to it," I said, but he ignored me and began to happily chatter away, not caring whether I answered him or not. At one point he even asked me if I was single and asked for my phone number. I just gave it to him, but was planning to block his number if he ever tried to contact me or something. He even made a few comments about my looks, and how he found me so cute that I looked so lost that he just had to say something to me. At this point I began thinking about my options. For some reason I didn't think about approaching one of the air hostesses for help, because technically he hadn't done anything wrong to me, but I felt scared anyhow. I decided that I would get out as fast as I could as soon as we'd landed and ditch him just to be safe. I don't know, maybe I'm just being an idiot, but I have had several encounters with creepy people before that it was so bad that my few friends and cousin called me the weirdo magnet due to my naivety. So no, I'm not taking any chances. After all, I was a first-year student and had just started university, and I didn't have anyone that I could really call my friend. So yeah, I'm on my own. So back to the story. The plane landed and I tried to get out as fast as I could, but I have a carry-on bag and it was slowing me down. Sam was standing behind me the whole time, and once we got on the ground, he actually held my hand as if it was the most natural thing to do. I froze. I was really scared and I honestly didn't know what to do. I absolutely hated it when people touched me. Even my family never hugged me, and my very few friends knew that I hated being touched unless I told them it was okay to, and this stranger just holds my hand without saying anything. I know I should do something, maybe scream for help, but I just stood there and froze. And like the idiot that I am, I just followed this stranger. We walked past the toilet and I suddenly got an idea. I told Sam I needed to go to the toilet. At first he said there was no time because his brother was here and we needed to hurry up, but I insisted on going and said I really have to pee. I wasn't lying either. So he sighed and said okay. I got hopeful. Maybe I can escape from this guy. So I started to drag my stupid luggage to the toilet, but this guy stopped me and told me that he could look after my stuff for me. I said no thanks, but he just grabbed my luggage from my hand and told me to hurry up. So I walked to the toilet and stayed there for a bit, panicking. I thought about ditching my luggage and trying to escape without it, but then I remembered that my laptop was inside and that it has all my important documents that I needed for my study. I tried to call somebody, but my phone was dead. I started to tear up a bit and decided just to ditch my stupid luggage and run away somehow. But I must have taken too much time in the toilet, because then I heard someone entering and calling my name. Yeah, it was Sam. My heart dropped. I slowly got out from the toilet, fully convinced that this was it for me. I'm doomed. Now you would think that I could ask for someone's help or just approach one of the staff for help, and I know I should have, but as soon as he touched me, my skin crawled and I just got really scared again. And since it was already very late, and we were really the last flight to arrive that night, there were very few staff members around. Those that were working were engaged in something else, or were surrounded by other passengers, probably asking for help about accommodation for the night or something. I just watched them helplessly, hoping someone might notice my distress, but everyone just ignored me. While walking towards his brother's car, he told me to tell his brother that I am his girlfriend, and that to just stay quiet and he'll do all the talking. Then I thought maybe I could ask his brother for help and just send me to my university, instead of going to wherever this guy is planning to take me. But then I started thinking that what if his brother doesn't believe me? I mean, between family and a stranger, who would you believe, right? Plus, maybe I'm being stupid, and Sam was really helping me, even though he was forceful and wouldn't let go of me. Maybe he was just overly nice. Seeing no other choice, I sadly got into the car with them. Now, I'm not good with cars, but I remember the car I got into with these strangers is a black double-cabin Hilux, but I didn't see the plate number. We drove for about an hour, and all the time I was petrified, and this guy wouldn't let go of my hand. I noticed the brother kept looking at me through the mirror, which was making me even more scared and uncomfortable. Then they brought me to this condo. I was hoping that there really was a sister-in-law, and that all of this was just a huge, stupid misunderstanding. But then his brother told me that his wife is not home, that she was visiting some family members and would be back tomorrow. I don't know what to think about this situation anymore, so Sam told me I can stay in his room, and tomorrow morning he'd take me back to my university. I didn't really want to go to his room, but I don't really want to stay in the living room with two men that I don't know. He showed me his room and then handed me my luggage back, and I just locked the door. I just sat on his bed looking at the door. My heart was pounding like mad. For a while nothing happened. Then I heard a knock on the door. I tried to be quiet because maybe whoever it was would leave me alone, thinking I had gone to sleep. "It's Sam. Are you awake?" he said in a quiet voice. "I just needed to talk to you for a bit." When I didn't say anything, I heard the doorknob was being turned, but I'd locked it so he couldn't get in. Then it was quiet again for a while, until I heard the jingle of a key, and my heart dropped when I realized he had a key and was trying to get inside. I hurriedly told him to wait, and I opened the door, just a crack. Sam was there smiling at me again. "Oh, I thought you were sleeping. Why did you lock the door?" he asked. "What do you want? I'm tired. I just really want to rest," I told him, and tried to shut the door, but he pushed the door and prevented me from shutting the door properly. "Sam, please just leave me alone for now. I'm really tired," I told him, but he wouldn't budge. "Hey, what's wrong? I'm a really good person. You have nothing to fear from me. You can trust me," he said. At this point I got another idea. "Oh yeah? Prove it. Give me your IC," which is a Malaysian identification card. And to my surprise he said okay, and he gave it to me. "See, I'm not lying to you," he told me. I saw that his name really was Sam, but that didn't mean anything. The card seemed legit, but he is still a stranger to me. Long story short, he came inside the room and locked the door behind him, so it was just him and me. Trapped inside the room, he tried to have a conversation with me and tried to get me to sit down with him on the bed. But as soon as he tried to get close to me, I just stood up, tried to get to the door, at which point he proceeded to grab my hand. I tried to get away from him and finally screamed and told him to go away. I don't remember much about what happened next, but the next thing I know, I heard his brother's voice calling for us and asking what was happening as he was banging on the door. Now I was crying hysterically and struggled to open the door while Sam just sat on his bed looking at me, seemingly stunned as if he didn't do anything wrong. I finally managed to get the door open, and at this point I was sobbing and told his brother I wanted to leave now and that I didn't want to be there anymore. Somehow I convinced his brother to just drive me to my university. Of course the gate was locked, and the security guard there told me that I had to walk to my dorm because he can't let any car inside after midnight. I just said it was fine and walked the rest of the way, but I didn't care and didn't want his brother to find out where I stayed anyway, for fear that they might come back and search for me. I was exhausted, and I remember telling my friends back home about what happened the next day after getting some much-needed rest, and they dismissed it, saying that I was being dramatic and that it was actually romantic. Yeah, they actually think it was romantic and that I'd missed a good opportunity to find a boyfriend. I was like, what the hell? Which part was romantic? The part where he practically dragged me to come with him even though I repeatedly said no? Or the part where he locked me in his room with him? Oh, and I still had his IC, but forgot I had it with me until I arrived at my room. I kind of just lost it and cried silently. Realizing I was still holding his damn IC, I cried harder, waking up my roommates in the process. I didn't know them that much, but they kind of helped me, and I told them bits and pieces of what happened to me. But honestly, I just wanted to sleep and forget anything had ever happened. For a week I lived in terror, and I refused to go out of the dorm in fear that Sam and his brother might come back. Sam did text me and called me a few times asking about his IC and asked me to hang out with him and his brother again, as if nothing had happened and everything was fine. Then he told me he went to my university looking for me. I freaked out. I asked my roommates to drop his card with the security guard and told Sam to just pick it up there, but he never came. I blocked his number after that. I ended up dropping out of the university a few weeks later, but for a different reason unrelated to this story, and I moved back with my family in East Malaysia. Now I don't know if I'm actually being overly dramatic about what happened that night, and I don't really care if anyone believes me, but it felt good to finally get this off my chest. I don't really know what would have happened that night if I hadn't have screamed and convinced his brother to take me back to my university. I'm a 30-year-old female, and when I was about 13, I was out riding my bike with my best friend, who was also a neighbour, around our neighbourhood. We did this every day, and this particular incident occurred on a weekend in the afternoon. As we were riding around, there was a girl, maybe 15, driving a golf cart down the street. We'd never seen anything like it before and didn't recognise her either. We were so taken aback and intrigued. She stopped next to us and we spoke about the cart. Being so excited about it, she offered us a ride. On our journey we came to a house that we'd seen a million times before, as it was just down our block. That was where she was taking us. I personally had never seen anyone outside the house in all the times I'd been past it, and it was heavily gated. As we passed through the gates, parked up and entered the house, I suddenly got a very, very bad feeling. Looking around, it had no furniture, and there were black tarps or garbage bags covering the walls. There were also strange men everywhere, but no one seemed to be interacting with each other. Walking through the house, we were led back outside, and some guy then started talking to us. Then we noticed a girl who crawled out of a hole in the ground that had a heavy metal lid, like a manhole cover or a bomb shelter of some kind, circular and old. When I asked the guy about it, he laughed and said it was an old underground room, and if we went down there we would never come out. At this point I felt the intense need to leave, but my friend wanted to stay. Yeah, I know. We were then led upstairs to a large bedroom with a desk, a computer, and a very visibly dirty mattress on the floor. There was a younger girl, around 8 or 9 there, and she seemed very scared. The girl who brought us there claimed they were sisters, but I got the impression that the younger girl was not allowed to leave the room, being how she looked and was behaving. The older girl left the room. I don't remember why, and my friend and I started to ask the younger girl if she was okay. She went on to tell us that they moved around a lot, had to sleep on dirty mattresses, and were barely given food. Once the older girl came back in, the younger girl went silent, and my friend and I were now beyond freaked out. We decided it was time to get out. We walked out of the room with the little girl in, and went back down the stairs. I could see that no one was looking as they had their backs turned, so we made a dash to the front door, with my friend behind me. I went home and told my parents, but they tried to assure me it was nothing. I felt I had to lie about everything except meeting the girl, because I was afraid I would get in trouble. 3 days later we drove by in my parents' car, and the house was empty and listed for sale. This was in Northridge, California. I moved out of state a long time ago, but I'm still super curious about what I encountered. I'm convinced it was a trafficking ring. I'd like to just start off by asking you to please not judge some of my incredibly stupid decisions of my creepy encounter. I was very young. So when I was 15, my sister and I ran away from home. Dumb decision number 1. I was gone for a total of about 6 months. At some point, for about 2 weeks, we were living in a run-down motel. One night, while I was by myself, I was sitting on the stairs of the motel, flipping through a magazine. Stupid decision number 2. A grown man walked by me and started to talk to me. He asked my name and why I'm sitting outside. I asked him if he was a cop. Extremely stupid decision number 3, since this shows him I do not want cops involved, as I was a runaway. He asked, "Do I look like a cop?" He didn't. He said he had some alcohol in his room and he was willing to share if I'd like to come up and drink with him. At 15, to me, free alcohol sounded great. I said okay and went with him to his room. Stupid decision number 4. We got there and began drinking and talking a bit. I forget what I asked him, but at some point I asked him something that made him get out his ID and show it to me. Under his name I noticed it had offender printed under his name in red. Warning bells went off and I asked what that meant. He replied, "What do you think it means?" At that point I just wanted the hell out of there, and as I'm thinking that, an additional grown man walks into the room. He sees me, smiles, and they both nod to each other. I am now locked in a motel room with 2 grown men. I turn to the first guy and say something like, "I have to get something out of my room real quick, then I'll be right back up." I must have sounded believable as he said, "You'll come right back." I said of course, as I wanted to keep drinking. He then asked what room I was in. I lied and made one up. Of course. By the grace of God, he let me out of that room, and I briskly walked back to my room. Not even a minute later the phone rang. I picked it up. "Why did you lie to me?" "What do you mean?" I said. "You lied about your room number. I watched you go into your room." I told him it must have slipped my mind as I was talking to him earlier. He then told me to come back upstairs to his room so we could keep hanging out. I told him I'd be right up. I then proceeded to unplug the phone from the wall and curl up in a ball, since I was so afraid he would try to come for me. I still to this day do not know why he let me leave. He didn't have to. Lord knows what would have happened to me that night. It's scary to think, since I was a runaway, no one would have known anything. I had no ID and was going by a different name. I looked up what offender means. Most websites said it means the person is a sex offender or out on parole. I was so lucky that night. Surprisingly though, it took me becoming an adult to really realize the danger I was in back then. To me at 15, he was a creepy guy, and I instinctively knew I had to get out of there. But it wasn't until years later that I really understood how bad that situation could have become. Hey fearsome friends, thanks for listening. Please make sure you subscribe and click that notification button so you can be aware of my videos when they upload. If you have a story that you'd like to hear me record, then please send it to my subreddit rmissfearsome83, or alternatively email me at missfearsome83@hotmail.com. If you'd also like to support me further, please go to my Patreon, where you can join for as little as $1 a month, where you'll get early access to all my recordings, and they will also be available as MP3 downloads. I also have some great merch on the Teespring website. All links are in the description below. Stay safe, stay happy, and remember, keep being creepy.